Hello, greetings everyone, and welcome to another exciting edition of the Pan-African Leadership Center series. This is our second program, and before I go further, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Daniel Mombono, the founder of the Pan-African Leadership Center, and I'm also the president of United States of Africa, an organization which is registered in Texas, United States, to unify all people of African descent and work towards the realization of United States of Africa. Today we have a very important guest who is going to discuss further on the topic of today, the African corrective, narrative of African worldview. And this is a very interesting topic that we have today. So we're going to have a mix of the Pan-African lecture and also a dialogue so that you can get involved. The reason why I established the Pan-African Leadership Center is promote Pan-Africanism, to promote youth and women leadership, and create a new generation of African leaders that are ready to tackle on the challenges that Africa faces. We need a new kind of, a new generation of leaders that will inspire Africa to utilize its natural resources and human capital for its own development. Without further ado, I'm going to add the guest for today, Dr. Kevin Washington. He's an African-centered psychologist and has been very active in Black mental health matters. Greetings, Dr. Washington. How are you?
Greetings. I'm well. How are you?
I'm also doing well. Welcome to the Pan-African Leadership Center program. We're really delighted to have you here. You can start by introducing yourself before you delve into the topic for today.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for also talking about the work that you do. I want to applaud you for this energy that you take to create a space for Africa to be able to shift into a zone of leadership that's consistent with Julius Nyerere and Kwame Nkrumah, with Jomo Kenyatta, because this liberating zone here of a Pan-African Leadership Center allows individuals to be able to speak their own truths, and more importantly, to speak the truth of Africa. I am an African-centered psychologist, studied African philosophy and religion to understand how we function as humans. And so I've looked at a variety of systems and have studied some various movements among our people to see how do we do what we do. And so I know that when you center the conversation of your identity, your purpose, who you are within yourself, it changes how you see the entire world. And so unfortunately, we've been forced to see ourselves from the lens or from the perspective of Europeans or of Arabs, of alien groups, but not necessarily from our own center. So we are always never measuring up to standards, because the standards always change. But when we begin to analyze this phenomena, as Malaki Asante said in his idea about Afrocentric thought, when we analyze the phenomena from our perspective, it begins to empower us, and more importantly, it begins to give us agency to understand that we are controllers of our destiny. So thank you again for this invitation.
You're welcome, and thank you for appreciating what I've been doing. It wouldn't have been possible without having so many people who are working towards attaining these objectives. You have also been part of what we have been working to ensure that Africans begin to look at things from their own perspective and tell their narrative. Because personally, I believe that until we begin seeing things from our own perspective, trying to even discern the truth from the lies that we were taught, we're not going to get anywhere. And this is why this conversation is very important, so that we can even learn how we can discern things from Afrocentric perspective. And how do we reach a point where we begin to see things from our own perspective, and to correct the damage that has been done? As the topic says, the corrective narrative of African worldview. Where do we start?
You asked a powerful question. I know one of the major books that changed how I saw myself as an African was the book entitled Yurugu, Y-U-R-U-G-U, written by Dr. Marimba Aini, and is an African-centered critique of European thoughts and beliefs. And it's important to recognize that there is a perspective from which we see ourselves, and we learn in the zone of the oppressor, as we speak in the oppressor's language right now, as you have a Europeanized name as well as I do, your first name, Daniel, right? The idea is that we are constantly inundated with the superiority of Europeans, and the antithesis of that is the inferiority of Africans. That is a philosophical position that people begin to adopt and accept as their own. Dr. Wade Noble says that power is the ability to define reality and to have others to respond to your definition as if it were their own. And so it is this idea of having a power differential. People begin to assume the superiority of Europeans or the alien group and begin to ascribe to all that they do. I think that on one of our calls or one of our messages, someone presented images of Africans bowing before European iconography in religion. And so the challenge was, do we talk about religion? The issue is that when people put their iconography in front of you and begin to suggest that it is superior, you have to challenge that because that is a position that they're taking that suggests that the European demagogues are the ones that you should ascribe to. Now, that begins to send a subtle message into the psyche of an individual that they are somehow spiritually inferior. So they can't be close to God. And so if you can't have that God connection, that thing that allows you to move, breathe, and have your being in the world, then where is your true power? So you have to challenge those structures. You have to challenge the structures, and the iconography and imagery is one of those things that has been utilized to do so. And I think in this image, they had several priests kneeling to the Mother Mary image that's been depicted by Europeans. Now, the corrective narrative of that would be that the image that they were bound down to is incorrect. The original image, the one that is utilized in the Vatican, is utilized in Poland, you will find that the image is of a Black woman with a child, and it goes back into the ancient African Kemetic construct of a Sar-Naset and a Heru. And so you find that when you have an incorrect perspective, you begin to see the European depiction of the phenomena as being the thing that we should ascribe to. In reality, there's nothing wrong with honoring and kneeling down and giving a deference to women and motherhood and what comes forward, but it must be correct in the psyche that the woman that we're talking about is not a white woman. Right? The woman that we're talking about, when I look at who gave birth to me, it was not a white woman. It was a woman that looked like me. She was brown skinned, of African descent. And so if I'm beginning to honor a European woman as the central image of my divinity, my purpose, I'm now disavowing myself from my own mother. So we have this idea of an incorrect perspective. And so we challenge those images. We challenge the images of a Europeanized Jesus in front of individuals, right? And so all over Africa, all over the African world, we see that where there's Christian societies, that Africans are bowing down to a European image of Jesus. And yet in the text that is called the Holy Bible, in that text alone, it talks about a person with feet that look like burnt brass and hair that look like wool. Now, when you begin to examine that, Daniel, that person with burnt brass skin looks like you, and the woolly hair is the hair on your head. And so the reality is then that we can read the text, but been given an iconography and imagery of Europeans as being the central character, we cannot even assess that as African people, that the image that they're talking about is us. And so we begin to disavow ourselves from having any divinity, and then begin to assume that Europeans have all divinity. And as a result, then they're able to run roughshod in our spaces, psychologically, but also economically and physically.
Yeah, thank you very much. I actually saw that that image, and I was intrigued how people bow down to these white images. And even when the Bible clearly stated that the depiction of Jesus was actually a black man, the same applies to Mother Mary. So these are narratives that we need to constantly challenge. And for us to be able to challenge that successfully, there's need to continue telling these facts, and to completely reject this foreign narrative that makes Africans look inferior. And the first step to attain that, I believe, is embracing who we are, getting to acknowledge that we are equal like any other race or group of humans. We don't have any shortage of intellect. And we have the same kind of understanding that other group of races have. For this to happen, there's need for us to correct our mindset, to start seeing things upside down, because the way we have been looking at things has been incorrect, and has led us to where we are, worshipping white supremacy, and actually giving it the power to continue oppressing us, because we recognize white as a symbol of purity, while we recognize black as a symbol of darkness and devil, as a symbol of everything evil. So by demonizing ourselves, I believe that we brought ourselves down, and we humiliate ourselves instead of looking back at history and see ourselves from a completely different point of view, from our own perspective. So what do we do to get to that point, whereas we are proud of ourselves, we are proud of our culture, we are proud of our heritage, and we begin to challenge these narratives more frequently, because here a white man will come here in Lake Victoria, and then after some time, there'll be news somewhere that he has discovered fish in Lake Victoria. And this has been going on. There's a story of a British woman who discovered who discovered whales in the Indian Ocean. And yet Africans have been there for a very long period of time. They know that whales exist. So how do we challenge this narrative? Because I know we are still using their education, we are still using their names, we are still using their language.
You bring up a really good point, right? So I want to go back and really explain what we mean when we say a corrective narrative. The corrective narrative is the one that is based on the authentic truth of a population, of a people, of a person. Oftentimes people talk about a counter narrative. The reason that I move away from a counter narrative is because the false narrative becomes the central conversation. And so we're trying to find ways to counter it, to somehow come against it, as opposed to placing juxtaposed to it the fundamental truth. And then you determine for yourself which one makes sense, right? Which one is the truth. So the corrective narrative is the one that is based on the truth. So you tell a story and then about me, and I want to counter your story with something. Well, your story is remaining true. But if I say, here is what really happened on this end, now we have the corrective narrative about what takes place. And so this is why we advance corrective narrative as opposed to counter narrative. We don't want to counter. We don't have to counter a lie. The lie is already incorrect. We fundamentally put the truth juxtaposed to it and then allow the truth to rise and stand on its own. Now, in the court of law, that's exactly what you do. You do the exact opposite. You present something and you then have in the minds of individuals this idea of the reasonable doubt. And so you introduce something that could be totally absurd, but it's there in its own record. And now persons have to work against it and to counter that. That's fine. The code of law. In the code of life, we need to be able to stand on our own merit and say, this is our truth. And our truth is this, is that if we begin to examine history from a European perspective, let's look at Herodotus, who's credited with being the father of Greek history. He said, when I got there to the place and saw the people, their skin looked like it had been burnt by the sun, which means then that the people that he saw in that space that he learned from was not the same as the people that he came from. So the other part about it is that he went to go learn from people. You only can learn from people who have some knowledge that you don't have, that gives you a greater understanding of the world. So we're clearly seeing that their historian, Herodotus, says that he went into Africa and learned what he learned. Now, this is important to understand also that Socrates, Plato, and others brought information from the continent of Africa and moved it forward. And when they brought forward the information, they were not embraced by their people. Why they were not embraced? Because that information was not consistent with the way they saw the world. So in reality, one was killed, others were excommunicated, and one even is not believed to have existed, Socrates, Plato, and others. So the point is that we see that they were, their reality, their information was questioned because it was not consistent with the Greco-Roman civilization. So when we begin to see this, we can begin to understand something else, that there was people already existed in a certain space, already had a certain set of knowledge that did not exist among the Europeans. And the Europeans came in and eventually began to procure it for their own and began to repackage it and present it as if it were their truth. Now we're talking about how do we counter it? Well, we don't have to counter it because we go back and say, who did Herodotus see? What did they believe? Let's start with as we talked about the book called the Holy Bible. We know that the word biblios means book, and the word holios for holy means son. Now let's go and ask the question, who acknowledged the son as being the S-U-N, as being the presence of a God concept that hit everybody with no discrimination? Well, we have to then begin to look at ancients of Kemet, and we see that there's Amun-Ra, there is Khepera, bringer into being in the morning. There is Ra, illuminator of the way in the day, and there's Amun-Ra, the complete one at the end of the day. We see that they were the ones that were talking about sun, S-U-N, and being an indicator of a God presence in our lives. So we don't have to have a counter narrative to figure out how to counter what they said. We simply put the truth next to it and say, if the book is called the Book of the Sun, then ask the question, who was examining the idea of a divine concept of the sun, not worshiping the sun, as the sun as being this illumination, this life-giving force, that all things grow towards the sun. That this group was very clear about the power of a divine presence. And so now we have a corrective conversation to understand even the thing that we want to call Christianity. We see that it is a bastardized form of an African understanding of reality. And we can begin to unpack narrative after narrative inside of one book. We can go to all the Abrahamic religions and find the same thing over and over and over again. We find that when we look at Judaism, it's the same thing of African philosophy being there. If we look at Christianity, if we look at Islam, we will find the same thing. It is based on African philosophical understanding of the world. We have to understand things. We have to understand the ontology. You have to understand axiology, epistemology, right? You have to understand how a group organizes the world. How they organize, what are their values? What is their epistemology? What is their nature, the way of knowledge? That's part of the worldview. And you can see that inside of the constructs from a divine space of religion and philosophy and Christianity. So let's even pause there for a moment. In African perspective, there is no idea around philosophy, according to Thea Paulo Binga. He tells us that it's not philosophy, the idea of lover of knowledge, right? Because it's not knowledge for knowledge's sake, but the idea of knowledge is there for the purpose of the functioning of the people. So we understand that when you look at, so even then using philosophy becomes a derivative of what Africans really did. And John Mbiti says that for the African, religion is life and life is religion. And so all of these things are put together to understand that we don't have to have a counter narrative. We have a corrective narrative, the one that says, based on an African reality, just based on, let's start from what you know to be true. Again, I'm going to say your Holios Bilios, your Book of the Sun, and where this came from. And based on what Herodotus suggested, that when he got to the place that people look like they've been burnt by the sun. When we look at the word Ethiops, which means burnt skin, right? The idea of Ethiopia, when we begin to just see and hear these terms alone, we recognize that these people were dark-skinned people who were engaged in a high-order relationship with their divinity, that they understood a variety of things. We can begin to look at the constructs, what is often mislabeled as a pyramid, and we understand how the pyramids were constructed, but recognize not how they were constructed, the idea that they are constructed with a base of 4 to a side of 3 to an apex of 1. People to this day still cannot figure out how these large structures were constructed, but the idea is that they're based on a philosophical understanding of north, south, east, and west, the points, but also the elements of the universe, earth, air, wind, and fire. And that these are the elements of man to the side of 3, the idea of man, woman, and child, male, female, and children, or some would say that spirit, mind, body, and spirit, that the trilogy that exists, to an apex of 1, which is the idea of an all-seeing eye or a God construct, right? That overlooks all of this stuff. This is in their space. Now, in the United States, people have the US dollar bill that has a pyramid on it with the all-seeing eye at the top. There is no place in Europe that you will find a pyramid that was built there that symbolized this idea of an all-seeing eye God construct. So we don't have to have a counter narrative. We simply look at what's in front of us and say, your truth is based on the idea of an African reality. And what was this reality? That in all things, there is this idea of a divinity. In all things, there's this thing called a God. It may be called a variety of names. Nyamen, Kulu Kulu, Tle. It can be called a variety of names, Bore Bore. But the idea is that there is this divinity, this sacredness. And some talk about Akhenaten was credited with being the one that came forward with monotheism. And you will find that is a part of African philosophical understanding of the world, that there is this divinity that has these derivatives that come from it, that has these dimensions out of it. So we see then, just from starting from the text that is utilized in Christian societies, we can look at the Quran, and we'll find some of the same connections. We find like one chapter called heifer, and understand that heifer, that cow, is tied to images and iconography in ancient Kemet of the sacredness of the cow, and so forth and so on. So the point is that we have to have a corrective narrative and not keep seeing ourselves as some type of bastardized form of Europeans, but in reality being the first world's people, that even by the European records, they can find no remains of any human being older than the ones that they find on the continent of Africa. And when you begin to examine the relationship of where they're finding these remains, Louis B. Leakey and others, where they were finding these remains close to the equator, and the equator is close to the sun, you would have to have melanin in the skin to be able to survive the ultraviolet sun rays. Thus, the population would have to have been dark skinned. Why is that critical? It is critical because if we examine closely the creation of the pyramids, we understand that Pythagoras could not have created geometry, that it would have had to have been the Africans who understood geometrical shapes prior to Pythagoras, and Pythagoras studied from them. And so now we're giving credit to the student as being the premier teacher. In reality, it is not the case that people of African descent had already understood this. Just as Daniel mentioned earlier about Europeans discovering the whales, people know the whale exists in the water. Just because you found it doesn't mean that it's never been known. And so we have to recognize that we allow these individuals to define our reality, that we allow them to tell us who we are and who we are not. The earliest remains talking about the idea of Lucy being found close to the space now known as Lake Tanganyika, close to Kenya, right? To understand that the earliest remains of any human being, and some even talk about the ones in South Africa, earlier than Homo sapien, right? Then Homo sapien sapien, that these early remains means that humans were engaged in the process of understanding the world and creating a reality long before Europeans got there, that they had tools, they understood metallurgy, the idea of how to smelt metals, that there was already an understanding because that was happening because they had tools that were created to chop down trees. So this technology that we're talking about, this idea of a corrective narrative, says that when we ground the understanding of who we are in our own truth, we never have to be the stepchild of anyone else. That we begin to examine and interrogate the entire world as we know it from our perspective and say that what does this mean for us as African people, right? If the Greeks were so wonderful, where did their greatness come from? Well, we clearly see that they have no real narratives, that their narratives, if you examine them very closely, are based on the idea of chaos and the confusion, the idea of that there is a male and female component to it, but they are always in conflict. That is a different worldview than an African worldview. And so we have to be able to interrogate from our perspective, and that's critical. And we have to do our homework, Daniel. The one thing that we are afraid to do is that we are somehow afraid to begin to examine historical text, like the ones written by George G.M. James, Total Legacy, the works of Joseph Ben Jochannan. We have to begin to examine John Henry Clark. We have to stop and examine what these writers what we're talking about, these authors, Sheikh Anta Diop. We have to look at the writers of Ivan van Sertima and see clearly Baba Asa Hilliard and see what they were trying to convey to us about who we are as a people, and stop utilizing the lies of the oppressor to determine who we are. I will say this, and I'll go for the next question, is that as long as the oppressor tells the story, and you know one about the idea of the lion and the cub, as long as they tell the story, they will always be the victor. We have to recognize that their narrative can never be ours, and that they will never write a narrative that will make us the victor, because it is in their interest to always be the victor, and that we are always to be diminished. So what's happening here is that we're saying we are not a diminution of anybody's existence, that we have a legacy of greatness that we honor, that we celebrate, and more importantly, that we stand upon as we begin to extend ourselves into perpetuity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kevin Washington. I agree with you that we must begin to examine ourselves from our own perspective and see things from our own view, begin to tell the truth as it is and as we say it. And for us to do that, I believe that we have to get more ambassadors that are willing to tell this truth out there, people who are not afraid to tell the truth, or because it's going to displease their colonial masters, or displease those who have been giving them political or economic favors. And this is why we have this platform to be able to tell this story without any fear or favor. We are not afraid of, if we tell this truth, they're not going to fund us. We don't get any funding from these so-called white supremacist institutions. So therefore, United States of Africa is an open platform to unify people of African descent so that we can create our own narrative, redefine what it means to be an African. And I'd like to ask you, what do you understand by the term an African? Who is an African? Because there are different narratives. If you ask this question to anyone in Africa and also in the African diaspora, there have been so many different identities that have been given to people of African descent. And so if you call someone an African, maybe in Latin America, he or she won't take it kindly. But if you call that person black, he or she will easily accept to be called black.
You know, we have a serious challenge, right, with this idea of identity. And we recognize that according to our various scholars, Joseph Ben Yakana talks about the space being called the earliest names: Taseri, Tameri, Taiwan, Nubia, Punt, Kush, Ethiopia, El Cabalon. And so we have all of these names for the landmass that is now known as Africa. We have to recognize that there is a connection, that if you find yourself in Brazil, two ways that people of African descent got there. One, so they got there because of traveling the trade winds and boating there, because Africans did indeed travel prior to the enslavement experience. And then secondly, there is the enslavement of African people, or the human trafficking of people of African descent. And so by extension, that makes you then an African of the African family. That is, that as Malcolm X says, that because a cat has kittens in the oven, it doesn't make them biscuits. Said from the perspective of a brother from Cote d'Ivoire, because children play in trees, it doesn't make them monkeys. The idea is that a river doesn't change its name because of a tributary that comes into it, that we have these tributaries into our reality. However, what remains true, what is strong, what is viable, what is the essence of who we are is Africa. Now, if you are from Europe and you were born in Africa, as I'm talking about the Afrikaans, then you are from Europe, born in Africa. That doesn't make you an authentic African. It makes you a European born African. Now, some say the other way around. All civilizations came out of Africa. That's fine, if you want to recognize that as a truism. However, my truth, and talk about the Pan-African reality, is those that honor, that love, that have land connection, that have genetic connection to that space and no other space, that then is that qualifies one to be African. So I have done what is called the African ancestry DNA test. There's several of them that exist, and there are questions about their authenticity or the accuracy. However, there always be questions about things around African reality until we begin to further push the agenda and define ourselves. But on my mother's side, it leads me to genetically into a space now known as Nigeria, among people that are now called Igbo. And then on my father's side is Burkina Faso, among the people that are called Bisa. So we've been able to do a genetic test to be able to, again, have a corrective narrative, not simply saying that people in this country talk about being Edos, American descendants of slaves. I am not a descendant of a slave. I am a child of an individual that was trafficked out of Africa for the financial benefit of Europeans. That's the reality. And so who qualifies as African are those who are genetically tied to the landmass, but more importantly, those who have a psychological and spiritual connection to the space and desire to do well by it. Now, if you do not want to be known as African, that is your business. You still are part of the African family. But if you do not have a desire to be a part of it, that's your desire. A lot of people have desires, but the truth is what the truth is. I don't care how far I travel into Ireland, they're going to know that I am not genetically Irish, even though I have an Irish name. Hey, my name is Irish. You don't accept me? That's fine, but you are not even a Black Irish. So we do know that Africans even travel into that space. The point I'm making is very clear, is that everybody knows where home is. The only ones that tend to deny their home are African people.
Yeah, and Kwame Nkrumah said, I'm an African not because I was born in Africa, but because Africa was born in me. There are so many there are so many people that were not born in Africa, but they can link the ancestral homeland to Africa. And there's some even in Papua New Guinea who said they immigrated from Africa more than 60,000 years ago, and they still have this connection with Africa. It's important to have this corrective narrative, because I understand that even if a Black person lives in Britain for more than 1,000 years, they'll never call him British or European. But how comes that if Europeans come and live in Africa for 100 years, they begin calling themselves Africans? This is something that is very surprising.
It is, and it speaks to, again, psychology, right? The idea of brainwashing an individual to begin to assume that what they have is inferior. Dr. Wade Nobles tells a story like this. He says that there's a making of a sheepdog, and you make the sheepdog by taking it away from its mother when it is a puppy. It begins to suckle at the breast of a sheep and believes that it is a sheep. And as it grows up, it will use all of its dog instincts to protect the safety and sanctity of the sheep. It will bark like a dog, but it will protect the sheep because it believes itself to be a sheep. You can put another dog in the pen with it. It will attack and kill that other dog because it believes that the other dog is its enemy. You can put its own biological mother in the pen. It will attack her because it believes that she is his enemy. But the worst part about it is that you can put a mirror in front of that dog and it will attack its own image in the mirror because it believes that its own image is the enemy. Right? And so we recognize that as African people, we have been taken away from what it is that we know to be true, either physically or psychologically or intellectually. We've been removed from the knowledge of self. We've been removed from understanding what the ancients of Kemet talked about when I mentioned earlier about the power of the sun. We were removed from the idea of a Tahuti and a Ma'at, the idea of what the Greeks call Thoth, which is the origin of the word thought. The idea of a person of knowledge and Ma'at being the truth, and that you had to have correct behavior married to correct thought. That they had to be Ma'at symbolized the 7 principles of reciprocity and harmony and balance and propriety and truth, right? And these were parts of this idea of the correct behavior tied to correct thought. That is deep psychology that they were talking about when they said truth, right, and thought. The idea of behavior and thinking must be consistent. The idea of the scarab dung beetle that rolled its egg towards the sun for an entire day among the ancients of Kemet, and it rolled its eggs that it put in dung, feces that it found in the sand, that the scarab dung beetle lays its eggs in dung, feces, and rolls it towards the sun for an entire day. And 28 days later, the eggs hatch. We know that the moon has a 28-day cycle. We know that women have a 28-day cycle. So they understood that the beetle was somehow tied to the universe and vice versa. And if the beetle was tied to the universe, so were they. So that changed then how they understood divinity. So the scarab dung beetle becomes an iconography, an image of this element of divinity, sacredness. Even as I was mentioning about Ma'at becomes blind justice in the United States, where there's this woman with the scales, because the idea that on the day of your demise, according to the ancients of Kemet, there would be an utterance of the 42 negative confessions, which later becomes known as the 10 Commandments, and that these confessions, your soul has to weigh in a balance against the feather of Ma'at, that it has to stand when you say that I have not taken from children. I have not defrauded. I have not done these evil things, right? And so it has to weigh in the balance. And so that becomes the image, and iconography is utilized in the U.S. to symbolize blind justice. Back to the scarab dung beetle, roll instead aim towards the sun for an entire day. Now, let's go back to what we said earlier about the book, Holios Biblios, the book of the sun. Well, not only is the beetle tied to the universe in the 20-day cycle, that's the moon cycle, but also moving towards the sun. That's a solar calendar. So you're talking about the issue of being celestially connected. And this is the understanding that Africans had that moved them to create temples and create the obelisks. Was that create the chemistry to have what's known as the seven liberated arts, become the trivium and the quadrivium by the Greeks and the Romans, right? The grammar, rhetoric, logic, and mathematics. These came out of ancient African thought. And so the symbol of the scarab dung beetle, again, let's look at this, that one can be born in a messy situation. If they move towards a reality greater than themselves, they can be transformed and have new life. And so the scarab dung beetle becomes a symbol of transformation. The same conversation that is had about a Jesus in Christianity, Yeshua, Hebrew, right? The same conversation about being rolled in a tomb and coming out in 3 days, but the idea is that even though it was a precarious situation, it was elevated because it went to something higher than itself. So we see constantly that the narratives of African people are being retold, and that we're not seeing it as such. But also note that even when you look at the top of the scarab dung beetle, it looks like the top of the skull of the cranial. And so when you begin to see that, what you find is that the various lobes on the brain are consistent with enlightenment, understanding of the entire world. For example, the frontal lobe is symbol this idea of executive functioning. So the scarab dung beetle had the sun elevated towards the frontal lobe, the idea of executive functioning, the parietal lobe, the idea where the wings were. And so we find that this thinking of African people and understanding how the brain is predating European reality. I get excited about this because we miss out on this deep knowledge. Johnson named Abu Simbel, and that is the wrong name for it. She was like Ramesses king. But the idea that we find these 4 images outside of this particular temple, and that 2 days out of the year, the sun shines through a portal into the back of the temple that hits the images, it's like the ones on the outside, on the inside, right? How do you construct a portal that allows for the sun to shine through like that? It's not something greater than yourself. And so we must recognize that these individuals that we come from, our ancestors, were brilliant, and thus we are their progeny, and we are also brilliant. But we allow the oppressor to determine for us our worth and value in the world, and as a result, then we see ourselves as inferior beings. But February 22nd and October 22nd, the sun and what's called Abu Simbel shines through the external portal to all the way to the back. Hit the same 4 images that outside on the front. This is African high knowledge. See, we come from those people, and they knew, this is my thinking now, that somebody would lie about them later, so they were able to etch in stone, in brick, images to tell their story. And so there's some people, Daniel, who would suggest that African people were not a literate people. But when you begin to look at the first images that were carved, and these are not hieroglyphs, these are not wood carvings, these were higher order thinking, this is thought. So thus they were called Medu Neter, right? Sacred writings of the gods, that this Medu Neter is there conveying higher order thinking. This higher order thinking is about aspirations, hope, dreams, visions, is bigger than simply rock drawing. We have to be clear about this. See, we allow others to tell us that it was just rock drawing. Rock drawing is with a man spearing a buffalo. That's rock drawing. But when you have high order concepts of Ma'at, the winged goddess, when you have Anub and Anubis, and you have all of these Hathor and these various images there symbolizing some level of high thought and weighing your soul against the balance of the feather of Ma'at, the idea of how do you conduct yourself, your living in life, how do you live your life in such a way that ascends to its highest possibility to be able to make the world better. When you begin to see that, you know that you didn't come from a people like if you read the Greek Orphic mysteries, where the greatest battle is won against Chronos, against time, and how you're fighting time, and how there's always chaos and conflict going on. The mystery of Dionysus and the Titan. And Dionysus was a man of great character, and he fought the Titan, and the Titan won. And so the god said that if we had a man with a heart of Dionysus and the might of a Titan, would have the perfect person. And so that is why you have the mind body split, the idea of the body being evil, being vindictive, harsh, and the heart being good. And that is not African thought. African thought was about there was always balance in things. Now, I'm not going to suggest to you that it was perfect. My point is that when you begin to correct the narrative, you do not have to start your existence with the Greeks, because the Greeks said that we learn what we learned from the African people. So then if they learned from us, what were they learning? Or they were learning just what we said about Abu Simbel. They were learning about how to construct the build in such a way that you're able to honor the divinity of the universe, that you can create the iconography that elevates yourself and moves you to higher consciousness. And so this is what we are saying that we have to get back to. And so psychologically, we have to make a major shift. And we have to look at not only ancient civilization with the various symbols and iconographies of Kemet, but also some of the contemporary conversations that we need to have. Like what do we do? How do we talk among ourselves? So if the word Zulu means people of the heavens, if Zulu means people of the heavens, if Zulu means people of the heavens, then what does it tell you about how they see themselves? They see themselves as divine. Let's go back to ancient Kemet. In ancient Kemet, what people have to say every single day is Anuk Asar, I am divine. So if Zulu means people of the heavens, it means that if you are of the heavens, then you are a divine people moving on this planet called Earth. That's a different reality than what we learn in the West about being, as you say, derogatorily, nigger, bitches, and hoes. We become less than human, and we allow the oppressor to determine for us that we're less than human and to tell us that we have no history. But in reality, Daniel, without an African reality, there would be no liberal arts educational, because they came from the liberating arts that came out of ancient Kemet. It was called liberating arts because it liberated you from the fetters of ignorance. That if you learned about grammar, rhetoric, logic, mathematics, astronomy, astrology, if you learn about the trivium, what later became known as a trivium and the quadrivium, if you learned about those things, you would be elevated to be more divine, and thus you could say, I am divine. See, schools, one of the earliest colleges, universities, was called the holiest of holy places, that where you went to go learn was a holy and sacred place. Timbuktu and Sankara are educational institutions. Timbuktu, several thousands of books survived after it had been pillaged, right? Think about thousands of books survived after being pillaged. How many books were there before it was pillaged, before it was destroyed? And all over the African world, you find heads and noses blown off and images scratched out because of the evil nature of Europeans not wanting to acknowledge the fact that people of high culture, of high ideas, high identity already existed. Let's look at the contemporary discussion again. I want to go into the Zulu for a hot moment, right? When the Zulu ask the question with Kanjani or Sawubona, they're asking a question about, do you have a presence? Some say that it's saying I see you, but if we look at the word Bukona, Bukona means presence. And so the question is asking you about, I see you if you have a presence. do you have a presence? For the Zulu, you are present to the extent that you are connected to your ancestors, or what was called the Abapanzi, which means our soil, right? The Amadlozi, right? So if you're connected to your ancestors, if you're connected to that, then you have a presence. If you're not connected and you're connected through doing umzabeza, you're connected by doing ritual. If you're not connected that way, then you're not present. You can only be present if you are connected. How does this tie into what you're doing, Daniel? You're saying that we must maintain our connection to who we have been in the past, understand our presence, to understand how we're going to go into the future. That is African philosophy at its finest. You're living it every single day. We have to understand that there's an ancient part of us. There is a contemporary part of us. So we can go into understanding the various greetings alone and see how the greetings tell us how we see ourselves. Right, even among the Yoruba, share the idea is about how are things with you and your mother and you, how things with you and your father and you, how things with you and your family. Right, the question is always asking you about your connections. That is the highest form of humanity in the context of the idea of Ubuntu. That is Ubuntu Ungabantu, a person to person because they're the people. The idea that I have power because there are others around me. That my Ubuntu, my idea that I am accountable to others, is the highest form of my humanity, not simply me doing it for my own sake. And so we see that there's an ancient part, but we have to do a greater analysis and have a correct narrative and not use European bastardized discourse to understand our African reality.
Thank you very much. You shared very important insights. And the Zulus emphasize the need for us to live in the present and be in the present, recognize who we are. And this is a very important philosophy, very important principle. The Ubuntu philosophy is something that Africans have embraced for thousands of years. And we need to get back to that, get back to our connections, and establish the relationships that made us thrive. The connection with the African connection with the universe, and connection with our culture, connection with our land. These are very important connections. And you spoke about art. Art is a very important, powerful tool of liberation. And this is the time for us to utilize it, go back to our history, and learn the truths, get to connect with our ancestors. There are a lot of achievements that Africans have accomplished. All over the world you go, you'll see pyramids. And if you dig deep, you'll see that these pyramids were built by Africans. And they have the same kind of architecture that was in ancient Kemet. So when we are talking from this point, then we begin to create a corrective narrative of how we see. Another important tool we can use is the media. Using our own media to tell the truth about who we are as African people, and to be able to showcase even the of Africans, and we establish the African History Month to celebrate the achievements of people of African descent, and acknowledge to the world civilization. This is one of the most important issues. Knowing our true history and rediscovering who we are, using our history as the stepping stone for Africa to recognize its full worth. Because the moment we begin learning more about ourselves, knowing who we are before the colonization and the enslavement of Africa, we begin to liberate ourselves. And this is the time to also challenge kind of narrative that looks at Africa as a very poor continent, a continent that is always waiting to be saved by the West. We have to recognize that Africa has countless natural resources. We have very talented young people, and this is the time to unite and utilize these natural resources for our own development, and also utilize the human capital, the talented young people that we have in Africa to steer Africa into economic and social development. Let me, before we wind up, let me look at comments here. We have saying that we have to rename Africa. We have to name it Al-Keblan. What are your thoughts on that?
I do believe that we need to center the language, the name of the continent with our own reality. And there's a conversation about Akabulan. Is that the original name? But we do know that it exists. The study and the work of John Henry Clark, that is very critical. So yes, I do believe that when you name yourself for yourself, the idea of determination, Kujichagulia, as you understand, in Swahili, when you name yourself, self-determination, it changes how the world sees you. I want to add this as well. I like the idea of the vibration. It says that the vibration of the suppression. That in ancient Kemet they understood that word had vibration, and that there was a reason that different symbols came together in order that now are known as letters in Phoenician. There's the reason why the R is the way that it is, and what the R means in vibration that goes forward from that. And so you can change the vibrational frequency of a word by changing the various dimensions of the lettering that comes on with it. And that's what it seems that the MPA Walker is getting at, which is very important. And so I commend that. Yes, we must understand the vibratory frequency around which we speak and utter and call ourselves.
Thank you. And then there's another comment. The word black is a corporate term. What do you understand by that?
The idea of black at some level does have the import for European reality, the idea of treating white, becoming, we understand that when Zengwell wrote the song, the play about the American melting pot, and Zengwell was a Jew, it shifted how Europeans saw themselves in America and how they were able to bond, because the British were considered in America to only be humans. The British and the Germans, they were battling back and forth, and so the Irish and others were not a part of that conversation. The Irish were actually the crackers who were, and by the crackers, they were the ones that were cracking the whip in the fields against the Africans. So they were being oppressed, and they were joining with the Native Americans and the Africans against the British, and so they consolidated under whiteness. And so whiteness does have a corporate and/or political connotation, and then the antithesis of that is black. And so we also challenge this idea of black, but we also understand that people knew that they were people of dark skin, and they were not they did not shy from that. So we have a challenge, but I do agree again with Walker challenging how black can be utilized to our demise.
Thank you. There's another comment I'm watching from New York. We like to encourage of Black Encyclopedia in multi-series. This would establish a better understanding of Black history, as well as an appreciation. What are your thoughts on this?
There are many scholars that have created volumes that we can use as this encyclopedia concept, right? There is the work of Malefi Asante, Our Intellectual Heritage, which is a dynamic volume. So if you just flip Dr. Malefi Asante, you will find quite a bit of work. Dr. Leonard Jeffries, you will find work. And so we should have a continuum. There's a sister who's working on creating this similar process for children. And it is a powerful bit of work that we're doing to make sure that our children know who they are historically. But yes, an encyclopedia is one of those things. I think that we have to take the scholars that exist. Another a friend scholar of mine is Dr. Carr at Howard University, who is one, and Dr. Beatty. You find that these brothers are part of ASCAC. They're doing some powerful work to catalog and chronicle what we do. We don't have to replicate what Europeans did. We just have to go back and deal with the volumes that we've already created and begin to make a continuum ourselves and say, this is what we must know. So some things we get from this document, from this scholar, from this scholar. So we begin to study the works of, again, I mentioned Asa Hilliard, of Ivan Van Sertima, of John Henry Clark, of Marimba Ani, Dr. Wade Nobles, Dr. Naeem Akbar. We studied the individuals. We studied the works of Tony Browder that you invited to be a part of many of the presentations here. When you begin to study their works and see clearly who we are, then that encyclopedia is being written. I will say this when we talk about encyclopedia, that our children are very excited about the internet, but not clear that the father of the internet is Megawali, who is of African descent. So as I mentioned, this idea of ancient African knowledge in Kemet, the contemporary knowledge is still here. The reason why that's important is because of the knowledge being in our DNA. That's part of our encyclopedia as well. That the cell phone that we have was invented by two black men, Samson and Miley. It's important to understand that because black men or African people of African descent created the device, created the internet, but also we know that the substance inside of the cell phone and the computer that makes it operate primarily is mined in the Congo. And so we know that tantalite or coltan is mined in the Congo, and we know that it is the highest conducting metal, fastest conducting metal known to man. And what I want to submit to you, Daniel, and to all of us is that the metal that is in the land was on the earth before it was in the land, or vice versa. That is, that as our bodies decompose and return to the earth, then they become the coltan and tantalite. So in reality, we are the highest metal known to humankind walking the face of the planet. And if we know that, then we have to act like we are brilliant and be brilliant and stop allowing others to give us this distorted concept of ourselves, and so we don't operate in the true manifestation and power that's already within us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kevin Washington. It has been a very great program, and now we are coming to the end of the show. And the next one will be on Thursday next week. And we're going to continue holding more conversations to engage Africans so that we can create our own realities, and we can have a complete radical shift in the way we see things and we see the world, so that we can embrace our own point of view and embrace the African standpoint when it comes to international affairs, when it comes to political or social affairs, and realize that Pan-Africanism is the only solution for people of African descent to challenge and to completely dismantle the systems that have continuously oppressed and suppressed people of African descent wherever they are. And United States of Africa is the only solution for people of African descent to be able to realize their full potential, and working together with Africans from Africa and Africans in the diaspora, we are capable of creating the new Africa that is described in the Agenda 2063. I'm going to let you make some final words, final takeaways before we come to the end of the show. Thank you very much, Dr. Washington.
Daniel, thank you for the work that you do. I really, again, admire your work and admire the work. I mean, I have contacted you at what's 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning your time, and you still respond. And it's like, this brother does not sleep. So I want to, again, commend you for that work. And I think I agree with you that Pan-Africanism, the idea of one African people, is critical to our movement. Nobody bifurcates themselves the way we do in the world. The people born in the United States will proclaim their Scottish heritage. They will celebrate their German lineage. They will honor their British reality. As a matter of fact, the highest grossing movies and our films in the United States are those typically of English or European, that Prince of Narnia, James Bond. We go on and on with Lord of the Rings. So we see that there's still this relationship that they have with their space, the planet, space of origin. And so we must understand that we are, even though dispersed in the African diaspora, we are a one people. The Pan-Africanism reality is there. And what happens is that it begins to set a course of liberation of African people, not only psychologically, but financially. We know how the French exploit Africa. We understand that other countries, the Brits, have people under this idea of debt. But when we begin to examine the African contribution throughout the entire world, we begin to see that the greatest debt is owed to Africa, that Europeans are indebted to Africa, that if the crown jewels on the crown of the Queen of England, that the gold came from Africa and the jewels came from Africa and India, then the reality is that there is no crown without African people. If we understand that the United States built its economy on the gold, and there's never been enough gold found in the United States to build an economy. The gold came from the Gold Coast of Africa, what is now known as Ghana. We recognize that the U.S. owes Ghana and Africa a great deal. We understand that the tea that the Queen drank this morning came from Madagascar, came from Africa. Then there is no English tea without the African reality. So we see that there is no reality for Europeans without African people. We understand that Gladys West invented the GPS and others invented these security systems that we find, and Africans invented the broom and so on. We realize that when we see ourselves as one African people, then there is a great deal owed economically to Africans on the continent and Africans that their diaspora. That is the power of Pan-African thought, that we are one people. And in reality, the Western world is indebted to us for perpetuity. And that is a major shift that has to also take place. So thank you so much for allowing us to be a part of the process. This leadership series is our prayer that we added something to the process, that people can begin to shift their psychological understanding of themselves and see themselves as being the center of things great and wonderful, and not a periphery of things great and wonderful, and understand that before there was any knowledge, there was first African or Kabbalah knowledge or Tassili knowledge. Before there's been anything, there's always been people of African descent that have been here making things happen. And as it appears, no matter what happens, we will continue to exist. Pamoja.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kevin Washington, for being part of this program. The Pan-African Leadership Series is to promote Pan-Africanism, inspire youth and women leadership, and encourage complete radical shift when it comes to leadership, redefining what democracy means to African people. Because I believe that for many years, Africa has been run from a Eurocentric perspective of means and perspective when it comes to leadership. And this is why we're always running into trouble. There's trouble in Swaziland, many other countries, because of trying to embrace these Eurocentric systems that do not fit the African reality. And Pan-African Leadership Centers, Pan-African Leadership Center encourages Africans the Afrocentric perspective when it comes to education, religion, social or economic affairs. There's need for us to go back to our roots and realize that what made us thrive was the communal mindset. The fact that we cannot exist if our neighbors cannot exist, and restoring this relationship, restoring this trust that we had in ancient Kemet is what will drive into economic and social progress. And United States of Africa continues to champion for unity of people of African descent. And we are the loudest voice when it comes to advocating for equal recognition and respect for people of African descent. But for us to regain this kind of respect, it starts from respecting ourselves and recognizing who we are and who we were before the coming of the colonizers, or before the coming of the colonized, before the coming of those who enslaved our men and women. We are Africans and we are one. Thank you very much for being part of the program. You can share the stream and tune in to our next episode on Thursday next week. Thank you very much. Whether you're watching in the morning or in the evening, have a good morning and have a good day. And thank you. And you can keep up supporting United States of Africa by enrolling on Patreon, volunteering, and being part of this Pan-African vision. Once again, I'd like to thank my guest, Dr. Kevin Washington, for being part of this program. Thank you.